Welcome. While people are still joining, let's just get some information. We are hoping that this will be very interactive. And I'm going to rely on my co-hosts to Mitra and Teresa to alert me if there are things happening in the chat that I'm missing. But right now, if you can use the QR code or go to menti.com and enter this, there'll be a lot of opportunity for engagement on the Mentimeter. I'm not sure if you've used Mentimeter before. I'll do a quick demonstration. So here's an example. We're asking where you're joining from, and can you see my voting? So if I click on South Africa, can you see that? So this is in a different screen. So fantastic. We've got people joining from all over. So I see we've got people from Australia, New Zealand, or the middle of the sea, China, lots of Asia, Africa. Very exciting to see everyone coming in, and hopefully more people are busy joining. And it would be great to just start by greeting. We have Molweni, Dumelang, Mushe, good morning, Namaste, Selamat Sejahtera, Makadi. Fantastic. It's so great to be here with everyone. So we've organized this workshop. This is the Reen board, the Research and Engineering Education Network board. And we've organized this workshop to talk about reviewing ahead of the REES reviews. People who are reviewers for REES should have received full papers to review. Some people aren't reviewing for REES, but I'd be very interested to hear why you are here today and what you're hoping to get out of today's session. So I'm seeing to know about the review process and what goes on in this process. Oopsie, sorry. Learning how to navigate this, how to review, to understand the best way to review papers on engineering education. I'm a PhD engineering education student. I want to improve my writing. This workshop will highlight what it is expected by reviewers and will help me to improve my writing. So that's great. We're going to be addressing all of this. To improve my feedback to authors. And to hear more about the expectations of the Rees review process. So we do have information about the Rees review process, but even better, we have two members of the Rees, we have the Rees co-chairs here, so they can fill us in if we have other questions that we haven't answered. So just to introduce you to the team, this is the Reen workshop team. Scott Daniel helped me prepare these slides, but he unfortunately could not be here today. Mitra and Teresa are here to help me to facilitate, and they're going to jump in and tell me if I've missed something or add anything if I haven't said what I need to say, or if there's something, but you're also welcome to put comments in the chat. That would be great. So let's just start with the reviewing process. And we're talking specifically today about the conference paper review process. The journal paper review process is similar, but not exactly the same. So we start with the author submitting the paper, and the chair of the conference, the chair of the program committee, that would be Dr. Preeti and Dr. Rohit in this case, might make an initial decision based on the fit. So if someone has submitted a paper on microbiology to an engineering education conference, then they're not going to send that out for review, for example. The chair then assigns to reviewers, and many of you have probably received review requests. If you can just do a thumbs up on the voting, you can indicate whether you've received a review request. So on the screen here, we can see how many people have been asked to review. And if you would like to review and you haven't yet been invited to do a review, then I'm sure that the program committee would welcome your email indicating your willingness to review. So the chair sends out the papers to reviewers, and then the chair waits anxiously until each paper has 2 reviews. Okay. So one of the things that is quite important is that you complete your reviews as soon as possible so that the chair doesn't have to chase people. Once each paper has 2 reviews, then the committee, the program committee, will make a decision about whether the paper should be accepted, should be revised, or should be rejected. And then the chair communicates that decision to authors. Authors submit their revised paper. And depending on whether it was just a final edit or whether there was required revisions, there might be a further round of review of the revisions before submitting the camera ready paper. So this is the reviewing process that we're talking about today. And the bit that most of us are familiar with is the author submits paper and then receives a decision. We should all be familiar with that. The other thing that we're familiar with, perhaps, is that you receive the review and you have to make a decision, write the review and make a decision. And so we're going to be talking about this part where you write your review, and we're also going to be talking about what that decision is. So if you can just participate, so you can always participate by going to this QR code, and I think Mitra has been sharing it in the chat for people who have been joining a bit later. What have you previously been involved in? Have you been an author? Have you been a reviewer? Have you been a journal editor? Perhaps none of the above. So we're seeing that lots of people have been authors. Some people, most people have been reviewers. Some people have not reviewed yet. Quite a few people have served as conference committee members, which means that you haven't just been reviewing, but perhaps you've been involved in making decisions. Some people are conference chairs. A few people are also journal editors or journal associate editors. And some people haven't done any of this. So we see that we have quite a lot of experience as reviewers. And we're looking forward to getting your experience. And I've been reviewing now for a few years, and I still learn a lot from every interaction. I'm going to learn more today from you, which will make me a better reviewer in the future. And perhaps it's worth beginning by asking, why do we review? What are the reasons that we review papers? So I imagine some people are typing in the Mentimeter. If you can't type in the Mentimeter, you're also welcome to type in the Zoom chat.
Helen, I think the voting is closed.
The voting is closed, but you should be able to submit.
Oh, yeah.
Let me just try.
No, we are unable to submit because it's showing like the submit button is disabled.
The submit button is disabled.
Now it's in. It's okay.
Now it's okay. Okay, sorry. Thank you. So we check whether the paper is adhering to the norms of the theme or not. We maintain quality. We help researchers in their career by giving constructive feedback. I think this is a great combination of two important ideas. So we help our peers with the right direction and improvements. We enable the conference or journal to maintain quality. We improve quality. So there's quite a lot of, quite a few themes that are coming up here. I'm going to allow voting. So if anyone's still busy typing, I'll give you a last chance to enter your comment, and then I'm going to enable voting, and you get 3 votes for which things you think are, which ones you think are the most important.
We also have some response in the chat saying
Oh.
that to observe for possible errors and to add value to reported work, which I think also aligns with some of the theme in the Mentimeter response.
So are people able to vote?
Should be, Helen. Yeah.
Just so if I press enter, then we can see we're looking at getting the best quality paper, maintaining quality, we review to improve quality, but we're also looking at contributing to the community, helping peers. I like this, to enable authors to present their work in the best light. So we're helping authors to be able to do the best that they can. So they've put in a lot of work, and we're helping to make it better, or to present their work in the best light. I heard a definition of reviewing, which is to hold the authors accountable to their own project. And I really like that definition. So that comment really aligns with that. So one of the benefits of Menti is that we can interact, but one of the disadvantages is you can't edit as you go. So we came up with a list of reasons for reviewing, and one of them is to develop our own scholarship. In fact, if you're a starting scholar, you might learn more about writing, and you might improve your own writing more by reviewing other people's papers, because it's much easier to see how the theory and methodology and results hang together in someone else's work rather than in your own. In your own, you're often too close to it. We build the community, and that goes to building, I think, a lot of the comments about ensuring the quality. So we're building the community by ensuring the quality of the conferences and the journals that are part of the community. We give feedback to help others to develop, and we help editors and conference chairs to decide what to publish. And that's, again, going to that idea of quality that quite a lot of people have spoken about. So we're going to talk now about two particular aspects of reviewing. So in the previous slide, we talked about giving feedback to help others develop. And so the first section we're going to talk about is, how do we do helpful reviews? What makes a review helpful? And then the second section we're going to be looking at is, how do we help editors and conference chairs to decide what to publish? How do we help them to make their decision and to ensure the quality of our journals and conferences? So starting here with giving helpful feedback, we're going to start by thinking about our own experience of receiving a review. As an author, if you haven't published a paper yet, you've probably submitted work to a supervisor who has also given you feedback, and that's a little bit like a review. What are the characteristics of good reviews? And then we're gonna unpack that a little bit more. Oh, What does it feel like to receive a review? It depends on if the reviews are available or not. Could you please expand on that? Oh, so the question is not clear. So we're trying to, as we prepare to review papers, we try to put ourselves in the shoes of the person who is receiving the review. So there is a feeling that you have when you receive reviews. In my case, it is quite often dread. Sometimes it feels like the reviewer is brutal or has not understood the paper. Sometimes the feedback is constructive and helps me to improve the paper. But it also gives us a feeling of opportunity to know where we are wrong and where we are right. So there's an opportunity to improve. Sometimes it's motivating to improve. Sometimes it's devastating. I'm grateful to receive a review. I often feel disheartened and judged. It gives other perspectives. So what we can understand is that we have different kinds of feelings. Different people receive reviews in different ways. And especially for someone who's a little bit insecure, you can feel disheartened. But other people feel grateful that someone has spent the time looking at the review. And so there are multiple perspectives, but I think there's often feelings involved. Mitra or Teresa, I don't know if you want to jump in here.
Sometimes I think where they have this ratings of numbers for certain aspects of the review, it's helpful, but then the comments would be more helpful for me to know, like, what is it that the reviewer wants me to improve. If they just give me the numbers, but very general comments, it's not that helpful, I think.
Okay, I think that's a really great lead into our next slide, which is what makes a review helpful. When you receive a review, what makes that review helpful to you? So reviews that are specific and build on the work, that's coming up quite a lot. We've got specificity, constructiveness. This is a really nice summary. Confirmation of valid work and actionable feedback to address identified shortcomings. Precise feedback on the different sections, highlighting how to improve. So we're wanting quite specific feedback. What is helpful is when the reviewer has indicated the parts of the paper that I've done well on and what could be improved. First, appreciate the author's efforts. The reviewer should be able to help author with the direction of improvements. This is a slightly different one. Reviews that make me think about different perspectives. So they help to broaden your understanding of the topic or make connections that you might not have made. Sometimes the reviewer may not understand the approach I am taking. So if you're still typing, just going to leave a few seconds for you to continue to enter your comments, and then I'm going to allow us to vote about what we think makes this helpful. So people are voting on what are the most important characteristics of helpful reviews. Oh, I'm going to reopen the voting. People haven't had a chance to vote. I hope the voting is working. Okay. Okay, so we've got specific and constructive. Specific is coming up. Concrete comments and suggestions to improve. Corrective feedback and suggestions to improve. Reviews that show an understanding of what I have done. Reviews that make me think about different perspectives. So when we were planning the workshop, we thought about some of the criteria that we thought were criteria of good reviews, and I can see that quite a lot of these have come up. So the first is that the evidence that the reviewer has read and engaged with the article. So some people said, sometimes it seems the reviewer doesn't understand what I've done, and that's not helpful. So we want to see that the reviewer actually read our article. Then constructive feedback with a supportive tone. Reviews that include feasible and actionable feedback for improvement. So that was an example of what people were asking for, things to be specific and concrete. A couple of people said it's important that the reviewer tells me what I've done right as well as what I've done wrong, strengths as well as weaknesses. One of the comments said that it should be short and crisp. And so this is, I mean, we've coded that you should limit your discussion to 2 or 3 major concerns, so that the author knows the most important things to improve. And then we didn't have this come up, but we're going to talk about this later. The comments should be aligned to the review criteria and the instructions to the authors. So if the review criteria are asking for papers about engineering education and have said, we welcome you to write in the first person, then if the reviewer says this is a technical paper and you shouldn't be writing in the first person, then that's not helpful. So this is our kind of working set of criteria for good reviews, and it seems to be pretty well aligned with other people's experiences of good reviews. But there's a couple of things there that we know how to say. We know that we want constructive feedback and specific feedback. But what does that mean? So what does it mean for feedback to be constructive? And how do we go about doing that? There's a comment in the chat that says, should identify strengths and weaknesses and give suggestions to improve. Reveal the good things in the article. I like this one. We need to be positive and encouraging and think through the paper before we start reviewing. It should not be biased, but solely objective. I mean, positive and encouraging, I like. I'm not sure that we can always be solely objective. We always bring our own bias. I don't know if any of the other facilitators would like to comment on that. Here's a nice idea of some steps to follow. Prepare in advance, be specific, focus on the objective, offer suggestions for improvement, use positive language, ask for input, set clear expectations. We read the paper and review it on its own without imposing our opinions on what the study should be about.
Helen, here Teresa is sharing that she agrees with you. She said that which can be very useful if we are aware of our perspective and we don't try and force the author to adopt our way of thinking. I think it's she's maybe referring to the one saying without imposing our opinions on what the study should be about.
Oh, okay, that's great. Great perspective. Comments should help the author to grow. So perhaps we also need to think a little bit about what we mean by constructive. So I like this one. It should be like scaffolding authors with the list of to-do things. So some reviews that I have received say something like, the author does not know about this. Or, so one of the things about constructive feedback is also to not talk about the author. You only have the paper. So we can talk about the paper does not show this or this, but we don't say the author, because if I read that as an author, then I feel attacked. So part of being constructive is to talk about the manuscript or the paper rather than the authors. And then I like this idea of scaffolding authors. So we're helping to improve, and we're helping to highlight the places where we need to, where there's room for improvement. And authors should understand what needs to be addressed and perhaps how. So that seems like there's two parts of the constructive. The one part is about revealing the good things in the article, being kind, not attacking, positive and encouraging. And the other part is about building up. So the building up leads us to, how do we give actionable feedback? And what do we mean by actionable? Comment that is not vague. For example, the writing needs to be improved does not help the author to understand what aspects need work. If we receive a comment that says the writing needs to be improved, I don't know in what way the writing needs to be improved. I don't know what was wrong with the writing. Is it that I need a proofreader to clean up my grammar? Or is it that I need to structure the whole article differently? That's not helpful. Improvements which can be done clearly. Feedback that addresses the SWOT of the paper. So that's strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I'm not sure if the paper is going to provide threats, but so feedback that addresses the paper from multiple dimensions. It can be in the form of a set of reference papers that can help the authors to improve the methodology section or analysis section. So here is an example of someone who has done a similar kind of study and their methodology section is really clear. So if you look at this, that can help you improve. I've identified these shortcomings in your methodology section, or things that I am unhappy about in your methodology section. And here's an example of how it can be done better. That's quite helpful. So if we're talking about grammatical errors, then we should highlight the paragraph number and section. Balance positive and negative feedback, offer examples. Okay, this is great. Giving actionable feedback also requires a reviewer to think a lot more deeply about what the issues are. How can you address the issue without redoing the study? So part of it being actionable is that we don't ask the author to go back and do a different study. They have done this study. Are there ways that they can improve their paper without collecting new data? Or have they just collected the wrong data? But if we say, you know, this isn't the study I would have done, that's not helpful. So we need to also be clear about what's feasible for the authors to do. The review must not be from the perspective of the reviewer, but from the standard required by the journal or conference. Specific areas that need improvement and give guidance on how it should be done. Use positive feedback language. Any of the other facilitators who would like to jump in and give some comments here?
There's a response in the chat saying that most of the time, the reviewer goes into the evaluation mode rather than they should be in mentor mode.
That's
Yeah, I
really
think-
helpful. Sorry, you were going to say, Mitra?
Yeah, I think sometimes we kind of like fall into this evaluation mode or mentor mode. Yeah.
So the evaluator is the judge part. It's when you feel like your job as the reviewer is to judge the paper, and to a certain extent that is the job, but your job as the reviewer is also to try and help improve the paper, and that's the mentorship. Teresa, I see, is saying suggesting rather than telling. Perhaps we could expand on that, but I know Teresa's busy typing. So I'm going, yeah, go ahead, Mitra.
Add one more, maybe I think for actionable feedback, we can also help the authors by maybe going through each of the section, like introduction, what context that we want them to improve, and specifically comment on the grammar and go like section by section. So from there, they can also follow the comments with the flow of the paper as well.
So Teresa has expanded. She says, helping the authors to see for themselves where they can address the issues, so that we're helping the authors to grow for their next paper and not just giving them a checklist for this paper. So that fits into the mentorship component. This is still the author's paper, not our paper. Is there anything else that anyone, does this feel like what we've done in the past when we've reviewed papers? So Preeti says, I also try and cover 3 points in my review: where they currently are, where they need to be, and suggestions on how they get there. So those 3 points show an understanding of an engagement with the paper as it currently is, and probably some recognition of the strengths of the paper. Where they need to be is things that can be improved, and suggestions on how they get there. That's great. And it's quite helpful when we think about how to give constructive and actionable feedback to have some kind of a process. So I have a process where the first thing I do is to write down the strengths. And that's the hard part, because it's easy for me to write. In fact, it's not the first thing I do. Let me be clear. I have a section at the top that says strengths, where I'm writing. And then I have a section that says weaknesses, and that I fill in frantically because it's very easy for me to see the weaknesses, because we are trained to be judgmental, to be critical. We are critical of ourselves and we're critical of others. And then I have to make myself go back and see the strengths. And so my template for a review starts by saying, I really like this. the study does this, so it shows that I've understood the study, or perhaps the editor can read it and see that I really didn't understand the study. I really liked this and this aspect. I think this is important. These are the things that I think are important to feedback. Teresa is saying it's also useful as an author to not have an overwhelming and endless list, which makes us as a reviewer think about the most key issues. Kaushik is saying the process I usually follow is in terms of some cosmetic changes in the form of grammar or formatting, followed with a set of references and links that can help to improve the paper. So I'm curious, those people who have been conference chairs or journal editors, what are you looking for in terms of feedback to the authors? How important is grammar and language, and how important are the ideas of the paper? I think there are a number of people who said that they are journal editors or associate editors or conference chairs. So if anyone wants to turn on the microphone and speak or type in the chat.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah,
Hi.
I'm Kaushik. As an associate editor for Jeet, my experience is when I get a review from the reviewers, most of the time this actionable feedback the reviewers are not in a position to give, because they try understanding what is being done by the author, but they may not be in a position to give a right actionable feedback. Rather, they say like, this is good, this is bad, right? So but how how does this help the author to improvise? That part will be missing. So hence that becomes a burden for as associate editor, that I need to add the sections before I send the reviews.
Oh, okay. So it is helpful if it's helpful for the editor or the chair if the reviewer has added some information about what they think could be improved. Am I understanding you correctly, Kaushik?
Yes, yes.
So there's a balance that we're finding here between not telling the authors what to do to write the paper we would have written, but also giving them enough information about how to improve it that they can actually go through and do something. So for an example, I might notice that the data are kind of inconsistent, and often with education now, especially if we do whatever kind of analysis we do, the data might not be really clear, but then the author draws very strong conclusions from that data. So then as the reviewer, I can say, your data analysis is fine, but you can't draw the conclusions you have from that data. So that's actionable feedback that allows someone to reframe the paper without redoing all the work.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Say, suppose the sample size was so small and they try to generalize whatever is their observations, they try to generalize it. So the reviewer can say like, sample size can be increased and the work need to be to generalize the work. So they need to increase the sample size or kind of a sampling that they have done. So could have improved. That way, if it has a actionable feedback, that will really help the authors.
But sometimes it is not possible. So for a conference paper, it might not be possible for the author to increase their sample size. So then we could ask them to reframe it as a pilot study and not attempt to generalize and say, in future, we will increase it.
Yeah, very true.
So sometimes it's about saying, okay, with this data, you can't draw that conclusion, but this data is still valuable. You've done work on it, but this might need to be reframed as a pilot or something else. And Teresa has said, as the person making the final decision, it's really useful to get some detail on why the reviewer thought it was good or not good. And so that's partly what's in the actionable feedback. So that's giving information to the chair or the editor. And PK Tulsi says broad generalizations need to be avoided rather than increasing the sample size. So if you've got a small sample size, then in the future, you should have a bigger sample size. But for this paper, you should interpret your findings differently, given the limitations, and you should acknowledge the limitations, for example. So I think, I mean, we're understanding that this is not always the easiest, but this is something that we learn as we go. And this is another way in which reviewing helps you to develop your own scholarship, because when you look at someone else's paper, it's easier to see that issue with the sample size in someone else's paper. But then if you think about how to mentor them to get this paper to be the best it can be, it's clearly not possible to go back to the beginning and start again. It might be possible, but it's not possible for this paper. So when you think about how to help the authors acknowledge the limitations of their own manuscript and reframe it, that also helps you think about your sample size and how to design a study so that it doesn't fall into those traps. Okay, so this, Teresa has nicely queued us up, because the next section we're talking about is making your review decision. And we're going to quickly talk through the differences between reviewing for a conference and reviewing for a journal, because the review decisions are a little bit different, but we're going to focus today on reviewing for a conference. It's important that you understand the review criteria. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how do you decide whether you have to make a decision in the end. Should that decision be accept or revisions or reject? Because it's one thing to write the feedback, and then it's another thing to decide where should this fall. And then lastly, we're going to emphasize the importance of the confidential comments to the editor or the chair. So just some differences between reviewing for a conference and a journal. And the first most important difference is that conferences have a limited time for reworking a study, and journals have an open-ended time frame. So if you're reviewing for a journal and you ask for major revisions, then they will send that to the author. The author will do the revisions, and then the journal will send that out for review again. But with a conference, we've been asked to give our reviews by the 27th of October. Is that right, Preeti?
Oh, yes,
For
it is.
Reese?
Yes.
And
27th
the conference is happening in early January. So there clearly isn't very much time for changes. There is time for some changes, but there's not time for collecting new data. So when you're making a decision for a conference, you might make a different decision than you would for a journal, just because of the time frame. Journals generally have higher expectations for theory, methodology, and contribution. Conferences are more inclusive. They'll accept work that shows potential. For Reese, although it's a research in engineering education conference, there might be a possibility that we include well-written practice-based papers. So conferences will be often a little bit more inclusive and allow development of the author through the process. So we might accept a paper for a conference that we wouldn't accept for a journal. For a journal, we would send it out for revision. So these are some of the differences, and hopefully Preeti and Rohit will jump in if I'm misrepresenting anything.
So Dr. Inglis, we are on board with you.
Okay, so let's just remember this review process. The chair has assigned the reviewers, the paper has received 2 reviews, and now the committee needs to make a decision about accept or revision or reject. And I've got accept, minor revision, major revision, but for Reen, we only have accept, minor revision, and reject. We don't have major revision. And that then there needs to be time for the authors to revise their paper and perhaps for those revisions to be reviewed before the conference, before the authors need to submit the camera-ready paper for the proceedings. So the Reen review criteria, I saw one of the comments earlier about the actionable feedback, and it said the journals and conferences should develop clear rubrics. Reen, I commend the chairs of this conference, has a very clear rubric. You can access it at this link, or you can access it if you search Reen 2024. And I've just summarized, it's focusing on content, it's looking for originality, how new, what kind of contribution is this work making? It's looking for scholarship. Is this work done in a scholarly way? Is it rooted in the literature? It's looking for relevance to the conference. It's looking for the research approach. How coherent is the research question with the theory, with the methodology, with the conclusions? Then it's looking for focus. What is the goal of the paper? Is that clearly communicated? Is this paper structured in a sensible order? Are the conclusions reasonable based on the data? And then it's looking for language, for style and mechanics. So these are the review criteria, and the rubric is much more detailed because it gives levels for each of these. So that's really helpful. And I encourage you to click on it. Also, if you've received your reviews, this is the rubric that you're marking within Easy Chair framework. Then for Reen, there is the opening to practice-based papers rather than strictly theoretical research papers. So practice-based papers is where the focus is on the design of courses or curricula or experiments or projects. And for these, we're not expecting to see a theoretical framework, but we are expected to see the practice, and we're not perhaps expecting to see a formal methodology, but we are expecting to see the work be well-grounded in previous literature. What have other people tried? Identifying a gap in the author's context. So other people have done this in America, but this is not being done at my university, and I would like to try how that works. Then a detailed description of what you've done, justification of the decisions for the design, and the implications of this practice for research or policy in engineering education. So this is an example of the conference being a little bit more inclusive. Some journals would not accept these papers, but a well-written practice-based paper will be welcomed at Reen. Dr. Preeti?
Yes, Dr. Inglis, I can hear you.
Have I captured the
Yes.
policy correctly?
Yes, you have. May I also add a little more to that?
Yes, absolutely. That's why we have you here.
Thank you for it. When we look at practice papers, as Dr. Inglis pointed out, it's mostly on course segments, laboratory experiments, and so on. But again, a quick example for that could be, just to drive it home, would be, let's say, for example, I do not know what, there is no sufficient body of knowledge on what design thinking is. So if I develop an instrument to say probably measure design, to identify the indicators of design thinking, that could be typically a research paper because I don't really have anything on design thinking, how to measure it. But of course, if I'm using that to probably say evaluate my course, that would be a borderline practice paper. It's an example that I want to share. That is one. And the other one would be, another thing would be, let's say you're developing a new model for course design, which has never been there, right? That could be a research article. But maybe using that a little, using elements of it to see if your course is adhering to it or things like that. That will be that align into a practice category. But again, to say that all all practice papers will have rigorous research methods, but not all research is practice. This is a kind of a dichotomy that we will have. All evaluation is research, but not all research is evaluation. So this is what I wanted to drive. Just add this to Dr. English's slide.
Great. So it's really important when you're reviewing for Reese that you bear in mind that there are different kinds of value, and I'm not going to try and rephrase what Preeti has said so elegantly, but we are looking for slightly different elements in a research paper and a practice paper, but we're still looking for a rigorous methodology and conclusions that are grounded in the evidence. So now you have to make a decision. You have reviewed the paper, you have written its strengths and weaknesses, you have given actionable feedback. Should you accept the paper? Should you accept it with minor revisions? I've put the major revision in brackets. Often for a journal, there's a major revision, but for Reese, we don't have a major revision. Or should you reject the paper? And I'm very interested to hear everyone's feedback on when should you do each of these things. Thanks, Mitra, for putting the review criteria link in the chat. This decision is, I feel, one of the most difficult judgments to make as a reviewer. I'm waiting for the words of wisdom. Everyone's typing very long responses. You don't have to answer all 3 questions in one response. Okay, so minor when the paper meets the rigor of research but has minor mistakes. Major when the paper fails to meet the rigor of research in terms of design, sample analysis, etc. So minor revisions, if I'm understanding this correctly, are the kind of thing you can change with rewriting. Major revisions are the kind of thing you need to change some study design.
Kaushik here have shared Helen saying
Go
that
ahead, Lisa.
major revisions refer to those where authors need to go and rework at the level of either data collection or methodology or analysis, while minor refers to connectivity issues between the paragraphs, grammar, better inferences, and all. I think that's a good one as well.
That's a good perspective. When should we ask for major revisions rather than rejecting the paper? Or when should we decide to reject the paper? reject if the paper is not aligned with the conference or journal themes and expectations. That's a clear reject. So that's easy. But if you submit, let's say we're submitting a journal paper, which allows for major revisions. Usually when you submit that and it comes back with major revisions, they give you a month to 6 weeks to do the revisions. So if it's going to require collecting new data, then it's better to reject, and the author can then collect the new data and submit again as a new submission. Whereas if it requires the author to reanalyze their data, that's possible to do within that time frame. So I think the difference between major revisions and reject is partly about time frame, but I'm very happy to hear from other editors and chairs. Okay, well, let's continue this discussion by thinking about these decisions. So this is 6 possible papers, 6 manuscripts which have been described, and for each manuscript you need to decide whether to reject, to ask for. Let me just switch to my other screen so I can show you that you can reject, you can do a major revision, do a minor revision, or you can accept. So for each of these papers, let's vote on how we do that. I don't know if you could see that when I did that switching of the screen. Yes, you could. Kaushik has also said, when the reviewer is sure that even if given an opportunity, the study cannot be improved, the paper qualifies to be rejected. So I hope that people are voting. Let me hide the results so that we don't give away the answer. See, the votes are coming in. It's quite a lot of decisions actually to make in a few minutes. So you can continue to vote, but let's see what answers we have. So if new data needs to be collected to answer the research question, we have, most people think it should be a reject. Some people think it could be a major revision. So we seem to be in consensus there. The conclusions go well beyond the evidence provided. Yo, we've got a lot of disagreement on this one, all the way from reject to accept. Perhaps people would like to comment on that in the chat, or if someone would like to turn on their microphone and talk about that. Got grammatical errors and typos. Most people agree that that's a minor revision. The paper describes an innovative method for chemical processing. And perhaps what I should have made clear is that the paper describes an innovative method for chemical processing, but it has been submitted to an engineering education conference. So I think that the people who are rejecting are saying it's not appropriate to the themes, and the people who are accepting saying it's innovative. But we have to be clear about, is this the right venue for this paper? The data needs some additional analysis to answer the research question. And most people are agreeing that that's a major revision. The authors need to go back and do some new analysis, but it could be a minor revision depending on how difficult that analysis is. And then the research is well designed and relevant, but the paper is written in the first person. Most people say that's a minor revision. Some people say that's an accept. So I'd be very interested to hear about comments about, so the conclusions go well beyond the evidence provided. PK Tulsi says constructive feedback to improve the conclusions. So let's have a discussion about this. Conclusions go well beyond the evidence provided.
Helen, does this statement means that the conclusion is some kind of like overclaiming the evidence that's provided in the paper?
Yes.
Okay.
So what would you suggest? Oh, Rohit, were you wanting to talk? Or Mitra, what would you suggest if the author's conclusions are too strong?
I think it would be a minor way they can reframe back the conclusion, aligning it with the evidence that they have.
I
would say that.
Rohit, you would also agree with that?
Yeah, I would also maybe move towards major revisions, but I think that really depends on the case, on how the conclusion is written. If it's somewhere line, but too strong, I think, and conclusion is at the end a small section of the paper. So I feel there is potential to kind of rework on that and submit it.
Yeah. And we can add a component to the conclusions where we acknowledge the limitations and reframe the paper, and then it's consistent. Is it okay to write engineering education papers in the first person? Opinions? So those of us who have been trained technically believe that we can't write in the first person. Except mathematicians. Mathematicians write in the first person plural. We see. But as an education researcher, so I see there's quite a lot of comments. Autoethnographic papers, perhaps. These days, people have started writing in the first person. It depends on the style manual. So when we are doing engineering education research, we are not 100% objective. We cannot be. The author is integral to the study. It is not possible, even if you do a statistical study, to design a study where your opinion doesn't matter. So it is much, I mean, in my opinion, it is much more honest to use the first person rather than to pretend that this was passed down. So that might be something where some conferences or journals really don't want it. And so the comment about the style manual is helpful. What is the style manual for, Reese? So will Reese accept papers written in the first person?
Yes, Dr. Inglis, it's APA. We will go for the first person as well.
Okay, I didn't know that APA also allowed the first person. So this is quite important when you're reviewing. So this is, as we can see, there's quite a lot of diversity in these decisions. And so as the committee chair, if you receive, for example, this set of reviews, you might receive one review that's a reject and one review that's an accept, because we disagree with each other. So this is where it matters that you give confidential comments to the chair. One of the things that I had not realized, and I was taught by a journal editor, is that you should always write confidential comments to the chair. There's a number of reasons why you should do the confidential comments to the chair. The first is it's an opportunity to speak more directly. So things that you would not say in the review because they are hurtful, you can say more directly to the conference chair, saying the author does not understand the theoretical lens they're using. Or perhaps there's a concern. I'm concerned that there wasn't ethics approval for this study, but I'm not sure if that's possible in their context. So maybe I've misunderstood. I need some guidance. I have once sent a message to the chair saying, I believe this paper has been plagiarized. So it's an opportunity to say things to the chair that you wouldn't say to the author. But it also allows you to highlight the key reason for your decision. So you give guidance to the chair. And this is where it really matters, especially if two reviewers have different opinions. So I chose reject because I don't think it fits the conference scope, but I might have misunderstood. So if you think it does fit, the paper's good. I just reject it because of scope. So that then allows the chair to interpret your review. Or I think that this is a great example of a practice-based paper. So though I've scored it low on the rubric because it doesn't necessarily have all the features you're looking for, I think this would be of interest to the attendees. So it allows you to argue for your case, and that gives the chair information. The other thing that you can do, so for a conference, the chair is selecting reviewers from all over the world, and they don't know most of them. So this allows you to give the chair information about you. So for example, I'm not an expert in statistical analysis, but I'm familiar with the context and the literature on this topic. So don't mind about my comments about the statistics, but take seriously my comments about the context and the literature. So all of these confidential comments to the chair make it easier for the chair to make the right decision. And it is a very good practice to start to write those kind of comments, explaining who you are, why you've made the decision you've made. So now we've got updated criteria for a good review, and one of the criteria that we've added is a good review helps the editor to make a decision. So as a conference chair, I've received reviews where the review had just the numbers clicked, as Mitra talked about early, no comments to the author, and then it said accept. And then I don't know why, I don't know if the reviewer spent any time on it. So it helps the editor to make a decision. And what we must remember as reviewers is the editor is not just evaluating the paper, but they also need to make a decision about how to take our judgment. So I see we've gone a little bit long, but so I want us to look at that you received in the meeting invite a PDF of some reviews. And because we don't have quite so much time, I'm going to ask us just to look at review 2. You are welcome to look at the others in your own time, but I'm going to shorten our time so that we can get finished on time. So take a few minutes to read through just review 2 and think about whether that complies with the criteria for good reviews. I'm just going to give you 2 minutes just to look through review 2. When you've finished reading the review, you're welcome to comment on how the reviewer has done on each of these aspects, demonstrating engagement with the article, being constructive and not attacking, being clear about what needs to be improved, noting strengths as well as weaknesses, distinguishing between major and minor concerns, helping the editor to make a decision. Okay, I see some votes have come in. We're waiting for a few more people to participate. Okay, let's have a look. Does this review demonstrate engagement with the article? Most people are saying no. So it's not clear that the reviewer has read the article. Is it constructive and not attacking? It's not very attacking. So it's more constructive than not, but it isn't giving enough feedback. Is it clear about what needs to be improved? Yes, pretty clear about what needs to be improved. Does it note strengths as well as weaknesses? Most people say no. Does it distinguish between major and minor concerns? Most people say no. So there's grammar comments and typo comments mixed up with a detailed comment. And then, does it help the editor to make a decision? So I want you to think about how you feel if you receive this review. If you get this review for your conference paper, you're probably, number one, happy because you got accepted for the conference. But number two, frustrated because it doesn't seem like they've really read it very much. Perhaps our mileage may vary, but I quite like it when people read my papers. So, but this review is not very helpful to help the editor to make a decision, because if the editor has received another review on the same paper that is a strong reject with good grounding, this review doesn't allow the editor then has to go with the reject, because this review has so little detail to justify the decision. If someone else would like to jump in, you're welcome to do that. So we're not gonna do comments on the reviews because we are out of time, and we will rather ask you to complete a workshop survey. If someone can put that in the chat, that would be great. So a workshop, we would love it if you would complete a workshop survey. And if you want to add comments about future workshops you'd be interested in from the Reen board, we're always glad to hear that. So you should be able to type your comments here. Thank you so much for participating today. And I hope that this has been helpful. And we look forward to seeing you again.